Okay, so I wanted to discuss this topic. So it's about post by Julien Timmer. I'm not sure if I pronounce his name correctly. He works for Fidelity. He's like some higher up. Is the director of macroeconomics, something like that. And I know some people don't like when I put down others people post. I'm not doing this because I'm trying to, gain followers by attaching myself to some person that has a bigger account than mine. Is the contrary, because I know that usually these posts people don't like them. They like when you celebrate somebody, and I am the first one to celebrate when somebody gives good and useful information about Bitcoin. Okay, I am all for that. It's an exercise we all do together. But I spent 12 years studying Bitcoin and 12 hours a day working on these kind of things. And like any professional, I care about conveying the right information. And if I see somebody that is followed by a lot of people that is supposed to be a professional, you know, I want to point out things that are wrong because it's the other component of trying to find out the truth. If there is some information that is not correct, and it's not an attack to the person, it's attack to whatever this person is describing. If there are some factual errors or some misunderstanding, then this misunderstanding needs to be pointed out. Okay, we can have a discussion. I don't mind to have a discussion with Julian. We can come up together in a video. We can debate. It's not debate. There is no debate in physics or in science. There are no debates. We can discuss it. Like we can try to explain our point of view, or maybe come to some kind of understanding, etc. But with math is math. There is no really debate about math. So what I'm talking about is also because I usually want to make some general points. Okay, so there is a lot of talk about these adoption curves associated with Bitcoin. And so people make this claim about adoption curves that are, in a moment, we will discuss what these adoption curves are. But basically, it's something that supposedly many different processes follow. And so basically, it's the idea that usually it's slow, the adoption is slow for this technology. So there are many different, in this case, is showing landline phones, broadband communication, immunization, so many different type of technologies that seem to follow this pattern. So we see in the x-axis the time, the date, and then how long did it take to be adopted by people, right? And you can see that they kind of saturate at 100% because most of this technology, everybody adopted them. Uh, some of them died before, like a VCRs, right? Almost everybody had a VCR, television, same thing. Some are new, so people are still adopting them, like broadband users, supposedly. And this is mostly, it looks like, it's about US. I'm not sure if it is because it's mentioning US, 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 so it's US, right? So we will also need to compare it with the world, etc. But it's okay, and it's true. Many of them follow these patterns, right? So it looks like it doesn't show here early adoption, but it's usually flat. So you will have flat adoption in the beginning because not many people adopted, and then it goes very, very fast. It looks almost like a straight line up, right, for some of these technologies, like the television. And then they saturate because everybody has one, so they reach 100%. There is no more to go up, right? And so some people believe because the cryptos are basically technologies, they follow the same path. And I thought the same thing. I have actually post in 2013 where I did exactly the same. I did two things. First, I noticed there was a power law relationship between price and addresses. Then I took addresses. I don't know what they are using here. we say per capita adoption rate. I don't know because it doesn't explain, maybe it does it somewhere else, which kind of proxy for adoption uses, but we could use addresses that are pretty good adoption, um, you know, kind of proxy because I think actually it's one of the best. It's really what you get. In physics, we really care about observable. So I can derive some other quantity that is supposed to signify adoption, but then you know you will have to trust me that they did all this correctly. In fact, instead, if we focus on addresses, they say, okay, it's a proxy, right? So let's use just that quantity directly, right? And there are some limitations, but it's a more honest way to do it, okay? But it's okay. You will get similar result if you're trying to extrapolate to number of users or whatever, right? So he's showing these curves, and I have similar curves since 2013. So I did this before many others did it. And what I did when I went from the adoption, the growth of the addresses, I use what is called a logistic curve. It is actually a generalization of these curves. And then by identify the relationship between price and addresses, I went to the price, right? Because it turned out that it was something close to what is called the Metcalfe law, that is about basically it says that the price goes up with the square of adoption or activity in the network. And so I did this before many other people. So he's presenting it like a new result, etc. I have done this before many other people. And then, he shows, and by the way, though, it says it's all about the network. Well, it turns out that networks really don't follow these S curves. At least it's not the most natural thing for a network to follow. And I will show you in a moment what a network prefer to follow in terms of that growth. So he says a bunch of things. So first of all, he says, I think actually before of this, I don't show it here, he mentioned that Bitcoin is the exponential gold. There is now, okay, some of these curves could be kind of exponential, some of a different S curve, but Bitcoin itself, the price in Bitcoin is not exponential. We have discussed this so many times. If you plot something in a log linear chart like it does here, so it does it in the second chart. If you plot something in a log linear chart where you take the log of price and you have time linearly, it will look like a straight line. We have discussed this so many times. I don't know. I mean, maybe I need to make a tattoo and show it to people. It's not an exponential. So I don't know why I mention exponential. Then he calls it, sometimes he calls it a power curve. Maybe it means a power law curve. So maybe a fidelity, we realize, and again, I was one of the first people to show, if not the first person, to say, so he calls it a power curve. In 2018, I posted a Reddit. I did all this on Reddit. Unfortunately, I should have published papers, etc. But it's there. It's public record where I mentioned that the Bitcoin follows a power law. So I don't know if he means it's not a standard terminology, power curve. I don't know what it means. It probably means a power law curve. And so, or maybe it means is using addresses with a power related to a power that is the Metcalfe law basically, and then from the model from their logistic curve they get the blue curve. I think it's not explained. Maybe I can dig in more in what we have done, but from the look of it, it doesn't look like actually it's derived from anything. It's a very pure beauty because it's a dotted line. It's the pure beautiful. I should recognize it. It's a little bit lower than what it should be, but it looks like the power law in time. And then we say BTC non-zero address count. We get the more curvy one, so probably that is derived from addresses. Okay, so the problem with that, and by the way, this is how you get these curves, right? You get these curves from the Gaussian distribution. Basically, you're assuming that there is some kind of distribution of a adoption. So there is like a late majority that is basically the mean of the average. And then there are some people on the left of the curve that are the innovators, are the people that are early adopters, innovators, maybe the early majority. They are all on the left, so on the side of the early adoption. So basically, in this graph, they show two different type of graphs. Right? It's a little confusing because unless you understand what it means, it can be confusing. So one is what is called a distribution, that is the blue curve. Distribution means I basically have a count, right? So here on the y-axis, I have for the blue curve, I have how many people are adopting the technology, right? So and basically I bin it. I take a sec. You say okay, anything between let's say uh, the first early days to a certain number of days, right? And so I count how many of that. How many are in the next bin, and so I had more and more time in the x-axis, and I'm going to have more and more people, right, until basically get saturation. And so some number is going to represent the mean, and then it's kind of almost like if I sum up the block curve and continuously, right? So basically, what is called for the people that took calculus the integral. So the integral of a bell curve, because this is kind of like a bell curve, right? Is this curve. And so it represents adoption, right? So it represents how many total people are adopting the technology until we reach 100. So the two are related, right? So it's basically the yellow curve is the integral of the sum, the continuous sum of the blue curve. You see how they are related to each other? So this represents the total, this is what is called the distribution. So like if you have different being and say how many people in this range, how many people in this range, how many people in this range, the two are related. But network don't follow often this behavior. So what I found is that actually, if we use addresses as the our proxy, and it seems that this is what they use because they mention addresses in this graph, in the previous graph, it's actually a power law. And it's a beautiful power law with the power of 3. And it's not an S curve. It's not. And I tried in the beginning, long time ago, to fit it with an S curve. And it's like fitting a round peg in a square hole. It doesn't fit very well. You can because you can fit anything with anything, but it's really a bad fit. And it doesn't make sense because network, if we say Bitcoin is a network tends to have power law growth. That is a very typical behavior for networks. And also it turns out that viruses, for example, spread in certain circumstances like power laws. And so, in fact, there is this case of AIDS that spread with the power of 3. That is exactly what we observe for Bitcoin. So it's a much better fit. It makes sense from a theoretical point of view. It's linked to network property. So I don't know why people continue to say that the adoption followed the S curve. The problem with S curve also is that you see how it's tapering off, right? I need to know when I do these models, when I do these models of adoption, and I found because basically there is an infinite number of curves, you could find literally infinite number of models. In particular, when you don't have enough data. If you have a lot of data, then as you go to start and you start to taper, and you see how many of these curves basically start to taper off at the end, right? Like this. Uh, it's very difficult to know where is going to taper off. Here is in percentage, but you will need to have an idea of how much the final population, because not everybody is going to own a Bitcoin, and even if is it the entire humanity? Then how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, how big is going to be the human population. So you are allowed to make a model of a human population. You are allowed to make a model of where Bitcoin goes. Is it 20%, 50% of entire population? How many people are going to adopt really Bitcoin, right? And so you're introducing all these parameters, and you're making your model so much more complicated. And basically, given you don't know, you're making a guess. Really, all what you can do is say, well, if 50% is adopting, this is what will happen. If 70% is adopting, this is what will happen. You have literally an infinite number of models, right? So it's a complication that is not necessary when it's you get this beautiful power law, and maybe eventually we will see some tapering off. And you say, what about here? Does it look tapering off? Well, it's also deviated up here and up here, so we don't know if it is temporary, if it's going up again. We will have to monitor it. But for the majority of the history of Bitcoin, a power law does a much better job, and it's much simpler, and it doesn't need all these complications than the S curve model does. Okay, so there is not really need. When we accumulate more data and we have some evidence that this process is tapering off, then we can introduce. And it's okay. It's not that you are changing your model. You just have more data and you adapt. It's a perfectly valid. It's what is not right in modeling. If I change radically my model, I make it try to fit at any cost, etc. That is not good. But if I get more, because right now it looks like this, and then little by little it starts to taper off, and there is evidence for that. That is perfectly uh, good in modeling to add that information. There is even actually method called Bayesian analysis, where you can update your model on a continuous base, to actually account for the new data, etc. If of course, if a model is consistent with the new data, right? So if it is completely different, then you have to throw away the model. So that is okay. But there are this beautiful result that I found where the addresses follow the power law, and actually I have even deeper results because I look at different cutoff of a. Here is basically no zero balance addresses. So basically all the addresses that have done some kind of activity. So they are a proxy for activity in the network. Okay, and it follows a classic result that is supposed to be a power law, and the cube actually makes sense because there are a lot of network processes that follow the growth with the cube, in particular viruses and other things. So you can say the Bitcoin is a virus of the mind. And then when you relate it to how price affect the addresses, you have this um, almost McCall law. It should be square. It's 1.77. Okay, so it's close, and you're not going to get anything perfect when you're dealing with real systems. It's going to come close to the theoretical result that this engineer Metcalfe found, that a network values itself with the square of adoption. And when you combine it, what do you get? You get the beautiful power law that we observe all the time, right? Because it goes basically as price is proportional to the addresses, let's say squared, to make it simple. And then because of that growth with goes to the cube, the square of a cube, it's 6. And basically, this is what we observe. We have this beautiful power law. It's explained. It's simple, right? It's simple. There is no real reason right now to introduce additional factors because there is no evidence that is tapering off, that is doing something else. And so we want to keep it simple. It's explaining so much of what is going on with the power law, with uh, this simple process, but there is no need. When it's tapering off, we can introduce this element. So it's a much more beautiful, elegant, and meaningful result because the power laws have so many different properties, scaling variance, all the things that I discuss all the time. And so there is no really reason. I don't know why people don't want to adopt this. Maybe because they are not aware, or maybe because it's my model, or whatever, for some other political reason. But the fact that when we combine the real exponents, we get 5.65, and the observed one is 5.71 with all the bubbles, all the noise that we have, and we are within 1%. It should tell you something that really these two processes together, there are two different power law, creates the power law, the observed power law in time. So, how can you argue with something like this? And, I have other results where I took different cutoff, and you can see it's something really interesting. I will make another video about that, where, doesn't matter what is the cutoff, you always get a number that is 5.65. What changes that as the wallet are becoming bigger, it goes like this. They have a bigger influence on the price. So basically, these are whales. They have a bigger impact. But then they grow slower. So they don't grow with the cube. They grow with square or one or whatever. But when you combine them together, they always give you 5.65. But again, how do you get that from an S curve? How do you get that by chance? You don't. Okay, you don't. It's something else. There is some other physics going on, but these people don't acknowledge or they don't care. What really worked, and this is a slide where I show you, just Google power laws and networks. They come up everywhere. A growth model for direct complex network with power law, growing random network and power laws. They prefer to grow with power law. So you cannot say, oh, it's success curve because of network probability. No, because it's power law. Then you should embrace the power law because this is what network prefer, power laws. Okay, so study physics, study power laws, because network theory is actually a branch of physics in a certain sense. So physicists know better networks, and we tell you that power laws are very typical of network, so not S curves. Then the problem is Julian, and again, I'm not trying to shame him, I'm not trying to put him down, I'm trying to tell people we need to be more precise with these things. I know that it's X. I know that we're talking to people that don't know many of these things, but actually, because of that, we need to be more precise. We need to take responsibility for these things. So when there is something that it really drives me almost crazy, because this Jurian says, and apologies, okay, I'm not trying to put down Julian, just trying to focus on the knowledge, okay? It makes sense given the asymptotic nature of a power curve. I don't know what it makes sense. I can go back to the original post. I don't know what he was commenting. But when I read this, I was eating my food and I was almost like choking. Uh, no, there is not, again, power curve. I don't know what it means. He has this funny expression. Why, Julian, do you call it power law? It's a power law curve. So if you mean that, do you mean the power law in time? Do you mean the Metcalfe? Which one do you mean? But there is no asymptotic nature in a power law. They are, they are polynomials. They are uh, simple polynomial. They don't even have additional term. There are things like y equals x to the n. There is no asymptote there. There is no asymptotic nature. So you're talking about the asymptotic nature, like you're saying something deep, something interesting, and then you don't know that a power curve, whatever you call it, a power law, doesn't have an asymptote. It doesn't. And so I pointed out to say, what you're talking about that as an asymptote? It doesn't have an asymptote. An asymptote is when you have a curve that there is like a line, usually it's a straight line. It doesn't have to be, but usually some kind of limiting curve, right? There is a process, and this process approximates another process, and it comes closer and closer without ever reaching it. Like for example, if you have an exponential, the exponential goes down, and let's say that it goes down, it's a decay, like radioactive activity, something like that, and the material, how much radioactive the material is, how much material, radioactive material is this material, in the case, it goes down with an exponential, and that exponential is trying to approach zero, but it never reaches zero. And so that zero is an asymptote because it means that you're coming closer and closer, it tends to that value, but it never reaches. Power laws don't have that property. They don't have an asymptote. It's ridiculous. So, if somebody that is supposed to be a director of fidelity, and, it's funny because one time somebody was telling me, oh, this actually was British Shaw. British Shaw was saying, hey, but fidelity is talking about S2F. They have it on their prospectus for their claim. Exactly. I mean, if I don't know basic math, I'm a little worried about why they show models based on math that they don't understand. I don't get it. It's not because I'm trying again to be negative and putting down people. I want precision. I want, if we talk about math, math is math. It's not politics. It's not debate. Let's try to be precise. Let's give information to people, in particular because we are supposed to be professional. That makes sense, and it's based on real knowledge, not on basic math misunderstanding. When he says on a log scale is curved, like the S curve that I show in the chart. Which S curve you show in the chart? Are you talking about Bitcoin? Are you still talking about Bitcoin? Because if you mean this, see, is I refer to this curve. Yeah, exactly. The slope becomes less steep over time, in line with historical S curve. No, 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 no. No, absolutely no. First of all, this curving that you see doesn't have an asymptote. You can see already, right? It's going on forever. It's not going to approximate any value. And the curving that you're seeing is actually an illusion. It's an illusion that is curving like that because basically in a chart like this, that is what is called a log linear chart. So if you have the y-axis that is a log and then it's linear in the x, anything that is not exponential will look curved. An exponential will look like a straight line. Anything that is not an exponential, because it's a slower process in a certain sense, it's losing ground relatively to the exponential, will look curved like this. But it's a hockey stick. It's a hockey stick. It's a power to the six. So, you can see here the rough chart, right, on the left. This is how Bitcoin looks like in a linear chart. So, it has the bubbles, so it's confusing, etc. But you can see with your eye that it's curving up. And in fact, if you plot the power law in a linear chart, you can see this beautiful hockey stick. Okay, it's an hockey stick. But it's not asymptote. It continues like that, right? It goes on forever. And it's not you. There are some hockey stick that have like they explode and then they have like basically a point where they go into infinity. It's a discontinuity, a singularity, but it's not even like that. It's basically regular. It continues to go on forever. But it's actually one of the things that people criticize with power law because they say it cannot go on forever. Well, first of all, it's a different issue, because we can always put some tapering, but like I say, right now we have no evidence for it, and we can always model it if we have more data, or if you are curious, we say, hey, these different scenarios, 10% of the population, 100% of the population, whatever, and you can do that. But right now there is no evidence in the data. It looks like a hockey stick. That curving that is mentioning, it's an illusion, and it doesn't understand it that is an illusion. When you say the slope, if you take it's the derivative of a power to the 6, if you take the derivative is power to the 5, it actually says that the slope is growing, not decreasing. So it's a mistake. It's a mistake. Everybody can do mistakes, but you should stop a second and trying to understand what are you talking about. There is no evidence for tapering. This curve graph that is showed here, it's an illusion of a log linear. You need to understand. Many people get confused because they are almost worried that Bitcoin is flattening out. It's like very big. If it was an asymptote, it will flatten out. It's not flattening out. It's not flattening out. That will what will mean to have an asymptote. And in fact, this is why it's so important for people to understand the power law, because then it's so clear. If you are confused by this and you are thinking that there is some tapering off there, well, then do the log chart and you see that there is no tapering, right? It's going up straight. That is, from a scale point of view, is continuing to go up. It's not tapering in any possible way. It will taper eventually, like I say, if if we don't adopt Bitcoin before this tapering, before full adoption, because Bitcoin could be, for example, adopted before it reached that, and when it's adopted, then I don't know what that will mean. Does it mean that they take $1 million and say, okay, $1 million is worth one Bitcoin. They peg it to Bitcoin. And at that point, there is not anymore a graphic show how Bitcoin grows relatively to the dollar, because there is one-to-one correspondence, right? It's pegged. We won the battle. So this is the story of how Bitcoin went to that place. The hyper Bitcoinization. And it ends. The story ends. There will be another story, right? The story